they know what they want in terms of the Ukraine war, but they have nothing to offer Russia. Mm-hmm. It's the same, we don't have the cards. So when I saw that we don't have the cards and Xi Jinping saying, yes, the cards are made in China, wonderful. With the Ukraine war is we don't have the cards and we have the cards and Putin says, no, we have the cards. You have 0 cards.
There are so many funny memes coming out of this round. It's like
the ones I've
the
seen
funniest,
already.
oh my God.
Yeah. If you have some more, please say that.
I will send it to you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Overlap. And here is Chris, our old friend, and today, here it is, Pepe. So happy to see you.
Thank you.
First time since we last met in Moscow a year and a half ago.
Yes.
And your first time back in China after COVID.
After COVID.
Yeah.
I was looking forward for this trip. And so far, wow. And it's great to be here at this particular crazy juncture.
Yeah. So today we are going to talk about a range of things for the world. Trump, Tariff, the Middle East, Ukraine, Taiwan,
Russia.
Yeah. So there we go. Our friend Pepe from
Thank you
Brazil,
so much.
author, geopolitical analyst, and independent journalist.
Very important. Thank you so much.
So happy
Enormous
you're
pleasure
joining
to be
us.
here. Thank you.
What's happening now? What is the
Wow.
Trump's American agenda today?
Oh, that's interesting because now there's an element of total chaos and they don't know how to deal with it. For instance,
the European?
the European Commission, which is basically a pyramid like this. On top, you have that horrible Medusa von der Leyen because she is the head of the European Commission. This means she dictates policy to all of them. So the ultimate decision is hers. Then there is a group of what we call commissioners. There are probably 25, 27. Many are from Baltic countries. These are the guys who implement these policies. So it goes like this, and then it goes to the capitals. So the capitals have no say about it. Paris, Rome, Madrid, they have absolutely no say about anything. Everything is decided up there in Brussels. So that's why if you talk to an average French citizen or an average Italian citizen from Sicily, for instance, they'll talk about these people do not represent me. They represent themselves, they represent a bureaucracy, but they don't represent the interests of the average European, wherever he is, whichever country he's from. So that's why the original idea of the EU was an American idea. The Americans invented the European Union. And they had their moles at the time, French and German especially. Okay, let's start a common market. In the beginning, we were only 5. And then started expanding little by little. And when some countries, they didn't like very much what was going on, there were referendums, they would alter the result of the referendums. And now we have 27 members, which is completely absurd. What unites France and Germany with Poland, Romania, or Estonia? Nothing. Literally nothing. In the case of Romania and Bulgaria and all that, internal immigration. For instance, you have people in the UK or in France, when UK was still a member, they do the jobs that the locals don't want to do, much cheaper. In the case of the Baltics, nothing, because they don't contribute with anything, But they drag money from the European Union. So they are becoming wealthier because Brussels allocates a lot of money to them. And obviously the big countries, they say, well, what about us? It's a mess. It's an absolute mess.
When you say what do they have in common, are we talking somewhere around the line of the concept of civilizational state?
Yes.
Which
Civilization states, and because these for instance, Romania and Poland, they have a relatively, I would say, enlightened history behind them. But the Baltics, come on, they were possessions of the Russian Empire and then Soviet Union. They have no distinctive indigenous culture or contributions to civilization. It's a completely different story. The Polish, they have a tremendous inferiority complex now because they had an empire in the 17th century when Poland and Lithuania, when they were ruling almost everything in Eastern Europe. So they still have this memory. And obviously anti-Russian. So what unites Eastern Europe and the Baltics is Russophobia. And what does the European Commission do? They explore and they promote Russophobia.
It's a reactionary grouping rather than
completely reactionary.
Yeah.
And that explains why we have this absolutely undefinable idiot, the Estonian chick, as the head of foreign policy for the European Union, representing 450 million European citizens from all over. This woman cannot analyze a cup of tea, and she's responsible for Europe's foreign policy. This is beyond absurd, because now it's beyond any rational analysis.
But as you mentioned, you said European Union was an American project.
Yes.
At the end of the World War II. And this Donald Trump administration has signaled very clearly that it's stepping back from security commitment.
Well, that's one of the, let's say, few positives of the Trump administration so far. But it's always about money.
Yeah.
With Trump, it's always about money. We are not going to pay for your security anymore. You know.
But when you talk about money, at least he means money for America as a country, the American people, or what are we talking about?
Industrial military complex.
Okay.
Exactly. So if you want to have our umbrella protecting you, which is the case since the end of the Second World War, the formation of NATO in the early 50s, etc., you're going to have to pay up.
Yeah.
So 2% of GDP is not enough. It's going to be 5%. So they look at their balance sheet, 150% more. We don't have it. Nobody has it. So they're going to have to borrow with those extortionate interest rates from the vultures, the usual suspects. We all know who they are. And obviously, they're going to cut off social services across the board. And that's the imposition of the Trump administration. And if they go on like this, you're going to have a lot of extra broken countries in Europe. Well, most of them are already broke. There'll be even more. And they won't have enough funds to buy these extra American military weapons. Most of them, by the way, don't work. Just look at the battlefields in Ukraine. All the, what we call Wunderwaffen, the miracle weapons that they sent to Ukraine, they were destroyed, shattered, they don't work, they sink in the mud, you name it, but it's every day you have photographic image of everything,
And also the Red Sea, they were, screwed by the Houthis.
Oh, but this is absurd. The Red Sea story is amazing. So we were very privileged. We were a very small group. 4 weeks ago, 3 to 4 weeks ago, we went to Yemen. It was an official invitation by the Yemeni Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
How long ago was that?
This was we are in mid-April. I was there in late, early March, was that? Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was there 3 to 4 weeks ago.
Right.
And it was absolutely amazing because we had access to everybody.
Oh.
We were the first group. There were a few Westerners and a few people from the East, including Professor Ma from Guangzhou. There was a Malaysian researcher, top-level guy from University of Malaysia, North Malaysia, near the Thai border. There was an Egyptian analyst. Nobody from India, which was a pity, because it was very complicated to travel. And the Americans were obviously freaking out. There were 2 Americans. So, and we talked to everybody in Sanaa, the capital. They took us to the northwest, to Sada, which is the birthplace of Ansarallah, the militia. And that was, wow. They took us to places that were being already bombed by the Americans. They took us to a cancer hospital, which is still being built. We were there on Wednesday. It had been bombed by the Americans on Monday. So we were the first to actually get it. We even collected samples of American bombs, then we gave it to them. So the Yemeni investigation committee will, of course, have their files about everything. So our access was unprecedented. And they told us, look, you broke the blockade on Yemen. You were the first foreigners to come here in years. So just to give you an example, I wanted to go to the souk, which is I love to do in the Arab. They sent me with an armed escort because they were worried.
Yeah.
So I arrived at the souk in a van with guys with machine guns. And there's a guys, come on, relax. I'm gonna go for a walk and try to talk to people. And then they were just looking. And obviously people love it. It was the first foreigner they saw in years, you know. And the souk is like you are in 1001 Nights, you know. You're back in the 10th century.
Yeah.
It's magnificent. The only sign of modernity that you see is the second-hand smartphones.
Oh, smartphones.
I found a place with currency exchange. I said, wow, you can send Western Union from here. And Yemenis are wonderful traders.
Since ancient times.
Traders or since ancient times all over the world. So obviously there was a lot of business going on in the souk. Everything cash. Piles of cash like this. Fascinating. Piles of cash. Cash economy and of course Islamic transaction over the phone. Fascinating to see that. Fascinating. And of course we talked to Ansar Allah people. We talked to members of the High Political Council, which is very interesting. You have the leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi. Right beneath there is a 9-member political council. So the religious guidance comes from him.
Yeah.
But the political decisions, the 9, they discuss it politically. And then they go to parliament to explain to parliament why they're taking this political decision. It's a very sophisticated system. It's a very sophisticated system. Nobody in the West knows about this, obviously. You know, no one. So it was great because we managed to talk to these 4 of the 9 members of the political council, and we talked with some Ansar Allah people as well. One of them was fascinating. You're going to love this. Our audience is going to love this. He's one of the top members of the political council, and we were at the dinner and relaxed and all that. And I said, do you mind if I ask you if you have privileged communication channels with China and Russia? And his answer in very flowery Arabic, you know, with lost in translation as far as I could see, but he said, of course we do. Obviously, this cannot be in the open. But this means that they have their communications with the Chinese government, with the Russian government. Obviously, the Chinese government, the Russian government, they cannot say openly that they support the Yemeni struggle, especially now that they are being attacked directly by the US. So these are privileged channels. It's not at the level of Ministry of Foreign Relations. You're not going to have Wang Yi talking to the guy in Sana'a. But they have their channels. I found that absolutely fascinating. This is something we could more or less imagine, but having a confirmation from a higher up like this. For instance, another example. Last year in Moscow, in summer, there were 2 Yemeni delegations in Moscow. One
was that the meeting in Vladivostok? Or?
No, this was a few days after St. Petersburg.
Oh, okay.
In fact, it was June last year, if I remember well. Okay. One of them was this delegation, Houthi Ansar Allah. And the other one was a delegation of the puppet government. They have a puppet government in Aden. I'm sure you know about this. Run by the Saudis. So the Russians talked to the official delegation, and there were a lot of problems to talk to the Houthi delegation. Some of us were trying to help, make a few calls. And look, these guys are here. They need food. Can you get a meeting with the Minister of Agriculture because they need grain and they need to transport grain? It was very complicated because Russia is very bureaucratic minded, you know. But obviously, officially, the Russians could not say that they were talking to this delegation. So it had to be, you see, underground. So these channels, they do exist. And from the point of view of China in Yemen, this is, don't forget, of course, you know better than anybody. Bab al-Mandeb, Chinese base in Djibouti, Red Sea, all this for China is essential in terms of security. So they need partners in Yemen that they can trust. So this is a very complex process. They know that they cannot trust this puppet government in Aden. No way. So they need these channels to talk to the Houthis and Nasrallah, of course, because they control the parts of Yemen that work, which is the northwest, the west, the port of Hodeida, which is the port where all their maritime trade, will be a node of the maritime Silk Road, right? So this will evolve, but obviously the Chinese and the Russian governments cannot say that openly.
Yeah. This is the part I like most about Pepe, because you roam around on Eurasian landmass throughout the Silk Road and you tell stories, which is a fascinating story. It's just
this story is absolutely extraordinary. Yes.
And about those privileged communication channels. I actually have a question because
of course
you wrote a piece on the Cradle.
Yes.
You said the three major takeaways is that Russia will not switch sides to team up with the US to backstab China. That's number one, which is, I think, many of us in China, we see that, we know that for sure.
You here know that for a fact, right?
Yeah.
And it's not only because Wang Yi is saying that this is the best relationship we ever had. We see it in facts, right? The Russia-China strategic partnership.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere. Brics, SCO, Belt and Road, investment, cross-border, everything.
Yeah.
Right.
But the other two takeaways, one is that China...
I know they're complicated. I agree
will
with
not
you.
be
I agree
circled.
with
Yeah, we talked about this yesterday.
Of course.
Yeah. Mainly has to do with China's its own rise in its capabilities. And the third one is that Iran will be defended. So
you said it yesterday.
main concern is who will.
Maybe I was too blunt with this. It was a bit provocative. I wish I had more space to detail why I was saying that.
Yeah.
Obviously, if there is a hot war attack by an Israeli-American coalition against Iran, China, and to a lesser extent, I think China's support would be diplomatic, it would not be straight away military. But Russia is different because in the treaty that they signed in Moscow, it was ratified by the Duma, very important. So it's ratified by the Iranian parliament and ratified by the Duma. There's a list of technical military provisions, which if you read between the lines, you know exactly what it means. Could be S-400 or even S-500 defense. Could be a few hypersonics that the Russians can, a few Oreshniks from Russia to Iran is not absolutely impossible. Why do we say that? Because since 2 years ago in Moscow, there was an Iranian delegation visiting Moscow. And I was talking to Professor Marandi from Iran, a very good friend. And he was tracking the Iranian delegation. And he said, the meetings were fantastic and all that. Because the Russians said, the Iranians said first, anything you need, just ask. And the Russians said, likewise.
Likewise.
How brilliant is that? This means military cooperation at the highest level. And obviously the Russian Minister of Defense visited Tehran and vice versa and all that. So we can, of course, it's speculative to an extent, but we can say with a measure of certainty that if that would happen, nobody wants the scenario, the Russians would help Iran at different levels.
Let's speculate further then.
Let's speculate further. Yes.
Okay. Because nowadays people are talking about whether US will really do that to launch a war. They say they have satellite image of B-2 bombers which will bust the bunkers in Iran.
They
they
tried in Yemen and they didn't succeed.
Yes.
You know that very well. Apparently, just the entrances, deep underground,
Yes.
forget it. No way. Yeah.
Yeah. So people were asking how much of this is just a bluff, sort of negotiating tactic to force you to the negotiating
Considering how
table.
Trump works, yes, it is a bluff, but it's much more dangerous than that because this is what the Zionist Axis wants.
Tell us about that.
And Zionist Axis is not only Tel Aviv, Netanyahu's cabinet, and those absolute freaks around him, including 800,000 at least, if not more, settlers in the West Bank, armed to their teeth, who want to destroy the West Bank and incorporate it to Israel. These people are beyond dangerous. There is the Zionist Axis around Washington, which is as dangerous as this one because they work together. And this is inside the deep state. So you have these people infiltrated everywhere. National Security Council, CIA, Pentagon, you name it. And of course, the weapons industry, and academia, and think tank, and media.
Where does Trump and his team stand against that or with that?
They are not neocons.
Yeah.
But some of Trump 2.0 are neocons. That's very, very dangerous. The only rational explanation is that keep your enemies closer than your friends. And Trump learned this from Trump 1.0, when he was surrounded by enemies. So now he brought a few of them in government so he can more or less, I wonder if he surveys what they're doing. We don't even know if he surveys himself. Can you imagine the other? Well, anyway, so this would be the rationale, right? The rational explanation. The problem is these people are too powerful. They were extremely powerful in the previous administration. Some of them are still working inside the complex. For instance, the State Department, they didn't have a purge from one day to another. These people are still working at the State Department. CIA, even worse. Nothing happened with people working for the CIA. So this is why it's so dangerous. And the agenda is the same. For instance, examples. This is something we discuss with our American friends, with Ray McGovern, Larry Johnson. We're always talking about this. And I'm always asking them because they were part of the deep state until a few years ago, right? There is this feeling in Washington, and this involves people inside the Trump administration, that what they did to Hezbollah, they can do with Yemen and with Iran, which is something completely crazy. The decapitation effect. They think that they can decapitate the leadership of Ansarallah, and even worse, they think that they can decapitate the leadership in Tehran, which is beyond wishful thinking. But they are convinced about it. And why? Because these very powerful Zionist Axis actors convinced even members of the Trump administration and even Trump himself that this can be done.
It did it last time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, okay, now let's turn to what remains of realists, Pentagon generals. Some of them say, look, we ran a lot of gaming and we lost all of them of an attack on Iran, or, not to mention the repercussions. We're just talking about the attack itself. Impossible. We don't have supply lines, enough bomb, but you name it. So there are a few realists in the Pentagon who know this. The problem is the Pentagon does not do policy. And now it's even worse because you have an absolute idiot as the head of the Pentagon. This guy does not even qualify as an idiot. No, it's scary. The previous guy was a weapons peddler, Austin. So at least we knew what he was doing. Okay, he wants more money for the industrial military complex. Makes sense. This guy's a total idiot, and worse, Iranophobe, xenophobe, and 50% Russophobe.
50%.
And completely
Islamophobe.
When I said Islamophobe, means the lens of Islam as a whole. It's not necessarily only Iran or Yemen. It's
Everything-
1.5 billion Muslims.
Everything about Islam is radical.
Everything
Is
about Islam.
radical.
This is immensely dangerous when you have the head of the Pentagon, a guy like that. So that's it gets more dangerous by the day, considering these people who are in positions of power and are heavily influenced by the Zionist, what we call the Zionist Axis.
I wonder how many people take the view of John Mearsheimer. He's of the view that Israel is a strategic liability of the United States. That the United States need to get rid of it.
2 points about John. We exchange emails. John understands the Israeli lobby and Zionist Axis very well.
Yeah.
I was in Washington when he launched that book with Stephen Walt, and we talked to him at the time, and they took a lot of flack because of that, but they had to do it. And only people at the highest academic level in the US could write a book like that. And we are all glad that they actually did it, right? He doesn't understand China, by the way. And you know this better than anybody. He doesn't understand China. Period.
Yeah, we've spoken on quite a few occasions.
You did,
Yeah.
Well, so this is
But we respect. I mean, there are Chinese institutions, Chinese people here say that John Mearsheimer is anti-China. We don't. Like we've actually.
It's
heard
not that
about-
he's anti-China.
He's
He
not.
doesn't understand China. That's more complicated.
No, but the thing is, like, we respect him in the sense that he comes to his conclusion about China within a coherent structure of within his theory. So that's
Right.
why we respect him on a personal level.
Of course.
We disagree with the Chinese, a few Chinese institutions, and including, without naming who, official media who refuse to air his content on fear that they're promoting anti-China voices. He is not anti-China.
But he gets a lot of exposure here.
He does,
doesn't
yeah.
he? Yeah.
Well, I basically think that China will behave like the United States. So.
Yeah.
Which is completely. In fact, he's a sort of Graham Allison 2.0.
Sort of.
But moving on to China a little bit, you said the
Yes,
situation
please.
is very dangerous. I mean, at least with the United States, well, I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but at least before you know who you were up against, right? Right now, you're talking about we are talking to people who are even beneath idiots. So that makes
Beneath
the
idiots
so-
and within a strategy of chaos.
right.
That's
So-
even more
So
complicated.
that's a lot. Adds a lot more instability and unpredictability.
Exactly.
So moving on to China, the trade war, which is not really about trade war anyway.
No, it's not.
So, one, we don't know where he's trying to get to, and two, China is not backing down in any way. So what's the next card? Is it going to be Taiwan?
Can I
Yeah.
give you probably the shortest rational explanation about the trade war? They want to provoke regime change in China. This is the shortest version. It's much more complicated than that. But deep in their minds, yes, we're going to mess with their economy. They're going to lose their supply chains to us and to the rest of the world. There's going to be internal strife, maybe a civil war, and regime change. These people are very predictable because this is the pattern they want for everyone that is deemed an existential threat to the US. The previous administration, one of the rationales of that tsunami of sanctions on Russia the first 48 hours, provoked regime change in Moscow. In Iran, provoked regime change in Iran for over 40 decades. So it's always the same stupidity. This doesn't change. So that's why it's so worried, because these people are obsessive. And when I say these people, 90% of these people we're talking about are part of the Zionist Axis. Because this involves their control of the international financial system, which is already substantial. When you look at the people behind BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, JP Morgan, you name it, the absolute majority of Zionists. And with, I would say, an international Zionist financial network, which is extremely powerful. And when you add some of those Silicon Valley oligarchs, it gets even more complicated. So basically, this is their, I would say, block thinking, and inside their window, inside their own bubble. But of course, there are other elements who are plain American exceptionalists, irrespective of ideology, which they see that the unilateral moment is gone. There's no chance that they're going to recover it. So what do? You do British Empire, divide and rule, which is what this, I would say, childish theory. Trump is trying to do a reverse Nixon. No.
People say that all the time.
No, this is too childish. It's much more complicated than that. Much more complicated than that. First of all, because both Russia and China know that they are trying to do a reverse Nixon. So it's already, dead on arrival. And it's not even a reverse Nixon because the Americans don't even know it's not what they want. They know what they want in terms of the Ukraine war, but they have nothing to offer Russia. It's the same, we don't have the cards. So when I saw that we don't have the cards and Xi Jinping saying, yes, the cards are made in China. Wonderful. With the Ukraine war is we don't have the cards and we have the cards and Putin says, no, we have the cards. You have 0 cards.
There are so many funny memes coming out of this round. It's like
the ones I've
the
seen
funniest.
already.
Oh my god.
Yeah. If you have some more, please say it.
I will send it to you.
Yesterday I was seeing Emperor of Tariffs.
Oh,
Did you see her as a tongue emperor?
No, actually.
Speaking on TikTok. The Emperor of Tariffs. This was.
Oh, I missed that one. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's good because it seems like that everybody in China is looking at it for the absurdity of it all.
Yeah.
So they cannot take it seriously.
Yeah.
Of course, it is
Actually,
serious.
no Chinese people, I mean, including J.D. Vance's comment on Chinese peasants, I would say no Chinese are actually...
Taking seriously.
Yeah, they're not taken seriously.
Exactly.
It's like, I have a lot of friends from Europe and say that,
Yes.
how can he say that? That is so demeaning and everything. I'm saying, no, this time around, nobody's actually being offended by that.
Exactly.
Nobody's being offended by that, actually.
No, because it's coming from a bunch of barbarians.
But moving on to what cards
Yes,
that
please.
Trump do have. Okay, it's like tariffs, and then what is he? A lot of people here are actually concerned about the situation in Taiwan. The people, the powers, the interest behind him also. You don't know what card are they going to resort to, or what imaginary card are they going to resort to. Is Taiwan going to be the next card they play?
Before Trump, everybody was worried about a false flag in Taiwan. So this was the number one scenario. If the Democrats continued in power, the number one scenario everywhere, okay, they're going to try a false flag. Because I'm sure everybody in China knows that Taiwan is an imposed issue by the Americans. Taiwan is not an issue for China. Deng Xiaoping himself said, okay, we'll be back until 2049. We're not in a hurry. And it's going to be peaceful reunification. It's a consensus. So it doesn't mean that China is going to invade Taiwan tomorrow. This is the American narrative. And it's the only thing that the Americans know how to do better than anybody in the world. They fabricate a narrative. They tweak the narrative. When the narrative doesn't work anymore, they come up with another narrative. This is how they do politics as well, which has nothing to do with politics. It's a reality show. And now we are in the middle of the biggest reality show on earth. With a guy who the only thing he knows how to do is a reality show.
We were speaking to Shao Shanbo, the former head of the Hong Kong government Central Policy Unit.
Okay.
And we talked about Trump, we talked about Taiwan, and we talked about the world. And one of his core message, which I thought was very insightful, is that all laughing matters aside, right? We're looking at this as a reality show, as a spectacle. You can trash Trump all you want, which is necessarily a lot of media or young people, commentators like to do. But you're going to have to look beyond that because ultimately what's at stake is huge.
Of course.
And then the conversation moved on to Taiwan.
Yes.
Which is, what's at stake is potentially even more lethal and fatal and devastating for world order than what happened to Ukraine. So that's why even if we can't, you got to resist the temptation to look at him as just a clown and to see that he does represent a sense of desperation where the United States have finally come to a conclusion that we cannot sustain this. Like they have finally come to a conclusion that we are not the monopoly dictator of the world that we want to be. And so that part is rational.
Yes. So
the desperation is rational. And that's why our conversation led on to talk about Taiwan, which he is very worried about. Its hands are tied in a sense. that Beijing has said repeatedly, and you don't have to read between the lines, it's there. Taiwan is a part of China,
Right.
but we want peaceful reunification.
Exactly.
They've been saying that all the time. You don't have
All the
to
time.
guess. It's just right there. But where its hands are tied is that given what the United States has been provoking the series of actions, it would be a forced war should there be.
Of course.
Yeah, it will be a forced military action, a forced war over Taiwan, which is never in Beijing's intention.
Intention.
Yeah. So that is why, and given the unpredictability of Washington right now, the worry is that you are, for real, seeing the most head-to-head confrontation between two largest superpowers of the world in our lifetime memory.
Now, it's impossible to imagine that Beijing is going to issue an ambiguous proclamation about what should be done about Taiwan because they are under pressure. The Chinese don't work under pressure. It's going to be in Chinese time when the time comes, right? So the thing is, the level of provocation is going to increase. We all know, right? To what extent are we going to get to a false flag? This will be the ultimate level of provocation by, in fact, is an American apparatus. It's Trump and everyone around him and the deep state. For the deep state, yes. Our number one existential threat is China. It's in the American national security doctrine. So it's way more serious than Russia, Iran, and everybody else. So this is I would say this next 4 years, will they get to the point of they will provoke a false flag knowing that China will have to respond?
Why can't Taiwan see this? I mean, everybody around the world, or at least everybody we speak to after seeing what's happening with Ukraine, right? Everybody should see that do not reduce yourself to becoming a pawn of Washington. But somehow Taiwan doesn't see it. What is going on there?
They're not sovereign, right? You know better than anyone. Taiwan is not sovereign.
Yeah.
If they were sovereign, they would have a position.
There was this,
always goes back to sovereignty. For instance, why Saudi Arabia doesn't make up their mind? Are we in Brics? Are we inside Brics? So we're going to be over the fence all the time? Or, because they're not sovereign. Their money is in London, New York. How they can make an informed decision? Out of the question. Taiwan is the same thing. Taiwan has no sovereignty.
Whose pocket do you think Taiwan is in, or at least
because you're closer and it's the same culture. You read what they write. You know how they think. They are not only in the pockets of American factions. I think it's much more complicated than that, right? But what about let's say, the Taiwanese oligarchy? How do they think in terms of a possible peaceful reunification? Are they extreme nationalists? Do they believe that Taiwan is going to be an independent state? Are they willing to die to have Taiwan as an independent state?
The more money you have, the less willing you're.
The thing is, I thought most of the wealthy people have all of their roots and connections here on the mainland anyway.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
So that's why I don't understand this.
Exactly.
Why can't Taiwan, or I mean, supposedly it's a democracy, right? And supposedly powerful, wealthy people should have influence over the votes. I mean, why are they still voting in an administration who, especially after seeing what happened to Ukraine, would still willingly be a pawn to Washington? I don't understand it. It is clearly against any rational calculation of interest.
Absolutely. So can we assume that the people who run the show in Taiwan, really, they are irrational actors? Is that possible? The way you see it?
Where did they find these people?
No,
Where did they find them?
Who are they and where can we find them?
I thought they had no connection with the deep state. It's just that they were shocked too by Trump, in a way. They are just like Europeans. They were shocked by Trump.
By acting even more irrationally? I mean,
how come they were shocked by Trump and they continue to act irrationally, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there was this parliament member he said that we Taiwanese people, we are very generous. So if Trump slaps us on the left cheek, we turn the right cheek. So
He actually said
he
that?
He actually said that. So he said we Taiwanese people are so good.
This is less than zero sovereignty, in fact.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we in the mainland, we see that. We say, okay, tell that to the PLA.
Tell that to the PLA.
That's funny. But also,
They are. China is learning from Ukraine a lot.
yeah.
Oof. This is a sensitive subject. 2 years ago, so it was 1 year after the beginning of the SMO, was even before the famous counter-offensive that went nowhere. Now you remember. There were some, let's say, Atlanticist-leaning centers of power in Moscow. Moscow is very complicated, but there are a lot of Atlanticists. They want to go back to the old days, They were saying, look, this war is going nowhere. The definition at the time was almost war. I found that fascinating. A lot of people were talking about, this is an almost war. It's not really a war. We're fighting with one hand behind our backs and all that thing. And they were not, they did not understand what Putin and the Security Council in Russia was trying to get to, because it was taking too long. And at the same time, these same people are, I would say, somewhat, in several aspects, harsh critics of the Russia-China strategic partnership. So this is something that took me a while to understand better. I was expecting, for instance, many more top-level Russian analysts to be China specialists. That doesn't exist. You have zillions of specialists on the Middle East, for instance, and very few on China. And then one day I had a conversation with a guy who's relatively independent. He's in the finance tech business. He said, yes, there's still a lot of diffidence in terms of Russia-China here among the elites. So I wonder if this has changed for the past year or so. It's a very tricky subject. You cannot discuss it. You can discuss this with very few people in Moscow. It's different what Putin, the foreign ministry, the security agencies, they think about Russia-China strategic partnership, which is on top of everything. But the problem is these oligarchs.
You mean in Russia?
In Russia. And many of these oligarchs, guess what? They are linked to the Zionist Axis and the London-New York finance axis. So this is a problem for Russia at the highest level.
So when you envision the new multipolar world,
yes,
right? Interestingly, I sent the link to him yesterday. Almost exactly 2 years ago, we did an interview online for our channel Thinkers Forum.
Yes.
And exactly 2 years ago. And the title, I just wrote it down to have my computer.
Fantastic.
You said, US dollar will be replaced in the next 2 years.
Oh my God.
And that's
I'm
exactly
sorry.
2 years ago.
I'm sorry. I stand corrected.
No. But I mean, we all know
you had
it's all figuratively speaking. But
figuratively speaking.
But let's just review, right?
Of course.
So where is the US dollar today? And sure, I mean, here's one thing. We ask you what you expect Beijing to do, what role do you expect China to play, and you ask us what does Beijing think? We don't know what Beijing thinks. But here is my hesitation, though, or the hesitation that I hear from policy insiders or advisors here in China, is that China may not be as ready as we wish China to be in taking up the void that the withdrawal of Washington is creating in world order, however imperfect it is.
Excellent.
So that void of power, is that going to be a new source of instability in the world right now?
It will be.
Right.
But it already is. Well, first let me correct myself about 2 years ago. You know why I said that at the time?
Is it settle oil trade in
Is that I remember
That the Saudi, right?
because was exact. because it was before the BRICS summit.
Yeah.
So, for instance, last year I corrected many of my assumptions because I spent half of the year in Moscow and I was tracking the organization of the BRICS summit practically, non-stop. I was talking to BRICS Business Council people, with Sherpas, with people in finance tech, with people who came up with different payment settlement systems. And obviously I revised my understanding. I said, well, this is going to be way more complicated. And now we know that it's going to be very complicated. But we have, I decided to call it the BRICS lab. BRICS is a lab. And they're trying and testing a lot of models. And this was fascinating because at the summit, Putin said more or less in these words, we are testing a lot of stuff. And BRICS business members have said, yes, we're testing a lot of everything. So we're going to have practical results about all our testing maybe next year or 2026. This is where we are now. So we cannot expect a breakthrough in the summit in Rio in July, but probably next year, oh yes, because they will be testing the BRICS card, the BRICS pay system, this something that they called BRICS Bridge, which is based on the M Bridge. People's Bank of China is a member of M Bridge. Yeah? The Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Thais, the Emirates, and there's another one that I always forget. Saudi Arabia? No, I don't think so. Well, I think there are 5 members of the M Bridge. So the BRICS look at it, maybe we can adapt this idea and use it as BRICS Bridge. And the best example that we always talk about is the Thais buying oil from the Emirates and paying with M Bridge. Excellent. Instant transaction, digital, no currency involved, no currency fluctuation. Can you imagine this if the BRICS start using this thing? Wow. So they are testing BRICS Bridge already. So maybe soon we're going to have a big trial run involving BRICS members and maybe the BRICS partners, including Thailand and Indonesia. And Indonesia now a full member, even better. So only last year we started to see how complicated the system is, but they are working very hard on it. Chinese input included. And then this announcement last month was March 17, if I'm not mistaken. People's Bank of China says, look, we're going to use the digital renminbi with the ASEAN 10 and with our West Asian partners. Well, in practice, you are abandoning SWIFT. If this thing works with the ASEAN 10, all major partners, China is the major partner of all of them, as you know very well, and some West Asian, which I would assume includes Emirates and Saudi. Wow. So you have West Asia, Southeast Asia already, soon Central Asia as well. We have 80% of Asia would be using the digital renminbi.
So the changes are happening.
These changes are happening. They are slow, but what's fascinating is that you have so many different test models, but they are converging. And they are converging to the same American nightmare, which you can define it as de-dollarization, but it's a progressive de-dollarization. It's basically using a basket of currencies or a different payment systems that don't need the dollar and they don't need SWIFT, which is basically controlled by the Americans. So it's it took many of us at least 2 years to understand that. So it helps that following BRICS last year, it helps a lot. This year is I must confess that it's very slow. It's because of the Brazilians.
But Trump,
you know why? Well, I was born in Brazil, so I can talk about Brazil with, at least I know how they think. You know what's their priority this year? Is the COP30 summit in the Amazon.
Yeah.
It's not BRICS. And that's why the BRICS summit is not at the end of the year, like was in Kazan last year, and it's going to be in July in Rio. It's absurd. How can you decide all these ultra complex issues in less than March. They have one meeting now in April, May. They have 3 meetings only left before this. It's absurd. You cannot do that. It's very unprofessional. But this is I learned from my good Brazilian sources. There is an anti-Brics lobby at the Ministry of Foreign Relations and at the Ministry of Finance in Brazil. Why? Because of the Atlanticist connection. The Brazilian oligarchs that think that our future is with the US and in the West. They don't even know. They don't know anything about Asia. That's very. Lula at least understands it, and Lula understands China. Lula has a very good relationship with Xi Jinping. Yes. All that is, but he's more or less isolated. It's an enormous problem at the moment. But for the next year, for the next BRICS summit, I think we're going to have breakthroughs. Let's say end of 2025, beginning of 2026. Refining what I told you 2 years ago, which was wrong.
I'm just curious. Well,
yes.
What will happen after Lula steps down? Because you just
excellent question.
Will it swing back to people like Bolsonaro?
He doesn't have a hair at his level, unfortunately. And the people in the Workers' Party, they're very mediocre. Oh my God! If you publish this, they're going to kill me. But it doesn't matter. They are very mediocre, essentially. So when I talk to my Brazilian friends, they say, look, Bolsonaro is still immensely popular in deep Brazil, and even in the big cities. He's very popular in São Paulo and Rio. São Paulo and Rio is like Beijing and Shanghai. He's still very popular. So we could have or one of his successors, right? But with a Bolsonarist view.
You already have Milei in Argentina.
And he managed to destroy Argentina in less than a year.
Where did that guy
come from? I'll give you the short answer. He is a product of the previous president, Mauricio Macri. Very linked to international capital.
Yeah.
Macri, I'll give you the short version, which is amazing. Macri calls Trump, look, I need a lot of money. Trump says, how much you need? 28 billion. Trump calls the FMI, give that guy 28 billion. This is the short version. And I'm not joking. This is how it worked. Very dangerous. Very, very. So no wonder Trump loves Milei. Elon Musk loves Milei. You know that very well, right? So this guy destroyed what was left of the social fabric of Argentina in a matter of months.
Yeah.
For me, it's very painful. I love Argentina. I used to go there a lot.
Yeah.
I still have friends over there. The country is magnificent, but their ruling classes are among the worst in the world. And if you think the ruling classes in Egypt or in Jordan are bad, look at Argentina. It's absolutely disgusting. It's like 30, 40 families in Buenos Aires, and they control everything. Horrible. And Milei obviously works for them and for this international financial. He's asking money from the IMF this past few days. I was reading about it. Another 20-something billion, which they'll never be able to repay. And with those interest rates that, it's completely absurd. So Argentina is like this. It's so sad.
No, he's amazing in the sense that he can make something so absurd sound so coherent. And I believe he believes in his theories.
He does. You're right. Yeah. He believes. For instance, he builds himself as a macroeconomist. He doesn't know anything about economics, but he sells himself as a macroeconomist.
He's a very, very coherent guy in his own mind.
In his own mind, you're right. Yeah. Yes.
But I want to wrap up this conversation with a question that I don't know how to put it. So tell me if I'm not making any sense. Okay. So we've talked about the problems that's happening in Latin America just now, and the extension of the Zionist interests, the pockets of interest around the world, even Taiwan for unknown reasons, completely irrational, is still in their pockets against their own interests, like how people would do things against their own interests, right? So now here's my question. Human nature or animal nature, instinct, survival instinct. Nobody nobody would do things against their own survival, right? That should be the human interest, right?
Of course.
But then, so if sovereignty is what we see to be the clear guideline to achieving prosperity and sustainability for you and your immediate circle of a society, be it a city, a family, a nation, a civilization. Unless one day alien invades, we are still divided by pockets of groupings of loyalties. So knowing that achieving sovereignty is the first step to that, why would some countries not? Why are certain countries able to do that? The ones that you circled out, Iran, China. Obviously, the reason why we are at the conflict we are is because it is not a place that is penetratable by the powerful interests behind Washington or previously London. So why are we able to do that and certain other countries or nations are not able to do that? Based on the presumption that every country or every rational statement should know that is the best thing you should do for your people.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the weight of culture and history in specific civilization states. For instance, India is a civilization state. Are they sovereign? No. Why? Because there are too many hang-ups from their own history. Number one, the caste system. They will never solve, if they don't solve this problem, they'll never be a big power in Eurasia as a whole and solve their internal contradictions. The recent hang-up, which maybe we could equalize of the Chinese century of humiliation, which is the Indian century of humiliation under the British Raj. They're still there. China went over the century of humiliation. China erased the memory of the century of humiliation, and with the force of Chinese work, Chinese the system, political system, work, introspection, learning from mistakes, to quote Deng Xiaoping. India, not yet. And of course, the serious problem that they have with their Muslim population, which is enormous, 130, 140 million Indians are Muslims. And these people in power around Modi, BJP, etc., they are Islamophobes, hardcore Islamophobes. And that's one of the reasons that explains this India-Israel sort of strategic understanding, to be polite, right? So these are only three reasons. And we're talking about an ancient culture, very strong, very powerful. But if they don't solve these specific problems, especially of their recent history, they won't be fully sovereign, and obviously they won't be exactly looking for their own interests. Why do you need to be a member of a Quad, AUKUS, all these stupidities that the Americans come up with, and even accept the denomination Indo-Pacific, which doesn't mean anything? It's a geopolitical invention by a foreign power, and you absorb it and you use it. It's completely nuts. It's against your interests, as you said in your question. So that's why we can draw a line between. Well, now we're going to get even more complicated. For instance, is there an Arab civilization? Essentially, yes. We can say that Arab culture or Arab mores, Arab ways of seeing the world, Arab customs, yes. I would not say civilization. That would be a little bit too much, except in certain periods of time. For instance, the Abbasids in Iraq, for instance, that was one of the apex of civilization. They had a house of knowledge in Baghdad. That's absolutely excellent, which was later destroyed. But periods of history. For instance, the Yemen, I was shocked in my first visit. Finally, I looked at Yemen and I said, well, this is the basis of Arab civilizations. It has nothing to do with those bling blings up north, especially the Saudis, And then I start to reread and reread some stuff, and I said, of course, even the Prophet Muhammad was saying that, that the purity of Islam is Yemen. So we can say that, okay, and it's not by accident now that they are under attack. Okay, if they represent the purity of Arab civilization, who is attacking them? The upstarts, Emirates and Saudis, supported by the West, divide and rule once again. And then Europe. Okay, I think this is the biggest. We could talk about this for days, in fact. Assuming that the basis of Europe civilization is Greece and Rome, which is technically correct, we look at Europe now. Those ideals of Greece, and especially Greece, they disappear completely. The philosophical ideal, Greece invented Western philosophy, among other things. That's a measure of high civilization. Rome was different. Rome, they copied the best that the Greeks had, and they introduced the notion of an empire expanding ad infinitum, But they did a few good things. Which reminds me of the Monty Python movie. I don't know if you saw this movie. There's a wonderful movie by Monty Python called Life of Brian. It became a cult in the West because it was basically the story of an alternative Jesus. And one of the scenes, you have a lot of people in the main square, Jews, and they're discussing, what have the Romans done for us? And then one of them said, aqueducts. And the other said, the legal system, public baths. You remember that? And this became a joke all over Europe because, well, it's true. The Roman Empire made a lot of good things that for the whole of Europe, not only for Rome, but for the whole of Europe. And then nowadays, this, especially Greek heritage in Europe, disappeared completely. And it was, we can even make a comparison of the purity of Yemen being corrupted by the Saudis and the Emiratis with the best of Greek civilization and the best of Roman civilization corrupted by the way Brussels works today. So Europe cannot say that they are a center of civilization now. They are a disappearing center of civilization which had its heyday maybe from the 5th century BC until the beginning of the Roman Empire, then a long period where the center was not Rome, was Byzantium. And Byzantium was Asia, essentially. Byzantium was an Asian civilization. And then the Renaissance, of course, very important, the Enlightenment, very important. And then in the 20th century, what did they do? They provoke a continuous war. World War I, World War II was the same war, provoked by their internal squabbles. So that's when their civilization started to collapse. And now it's collapsing for good with this arrangement of the European Union. So answering your question is very complicated because you have to make the distinctions of all these civilizations and how they interact. For us foreigners, what is fascinating about China, for instance, I see it as a continuum.
Yeah.
It is a continuum. And the Maoist era was a continuum in relation to the past. And without the Maoist era, we wouldn't have the China as big power today, which is something that if you discuss this in the West, you are immediately, you're paid by the Communist Party. But at least here we can have this civilized discussion, Yeah. And very few of these so-called Western specialists, everybody in the West now, he's a specialist in China. I didn't read his book and it's a bloody joke. There's one guy that I respect, I don't know if you agree with me. And he's not a specialist, he's a journalist, Martin Jacques.
Oh yeah, of course we know him.
Exactly, at a very popular level, but his book makes sense. And at least he understands why China became a big power. But the other guys who pose as experts, they're a joke, including Graham Allison. And people around. I prefer to read Kishore Mahbubani.
Kishore, yeah.
Singaporean, Indian extraction, but understands China. It's different. Yeah. I didn't answer your question. Maybe I put on the table the complexity of comparing civilization states. Yeah? And some they are declining heavily as we see it in front of us, like the West as a whole. And there's not even a collective West anymore.
Yeah.
I think one of the good things that Trump 2.0 did, he imploded the myth of a collective West. Now it's the empire saying, my way or the highway. You are with me or you are against me. And if you are against me, I'm going to bomb you or tariff you. This is their logic. And the European chihuahuas are like this. And what do we do now?
Trump is a barbarian. That's a funny thing.
Yes.
I mean, you were saying Western civilization, right? The one of the main topic of the right, alt-right, is revive Western civilization. But the funny thing is, they somehow they have an issue with Greece and Rome, but they go back to the Indo-European roots, which is like warriors, the ransack, and the young men warriors ride out to rob people and take back money and women. So that's like their warrior spirit.
Yeah.
That's like crazy. Like, that's the basic to bring chaos to people, those communities around themselves, in the name of innovation and warrior spirit, make progress. That's exactly what they're doing right now, which is funny and dangerous at the same time.
Dangerous, especially dangerous.
Yeah. But I think in China, as you said, China is a very coherent logic.
It's very coherent.
Logic.
Yes.
So we tend to make fun of them. Like Trump mentioned last year that if China goes to Taiwan, it will increase the tariff to 150 to 200%. So now it's 145%.
It's already 145%.
So please accelerate. Yeah.
Gosh. But look, this probably the biggest problem in terms of Western elites, American and Europeans, is the decline of educational standards. When you look at the big universities now in Europe and in the US, wow, it's pathetic. And it's going down everywhere. My German friend said, you have no idea German universities, what they are nowadays. That's why you have Baerbock. It's the best example, total mediocrity as a minister. So this is a process that has been going on for decades. And one of my Italian friends, wonderful guy, he's a professor of philosophy in Milan. Brilliant guy. He cannot be published in Italian mainstream media because he's too independent. And the same thing is said. And this thing started in the 60s already. And I read one of his books at least 3 times. It's brilliant. The translation of the title is like a critique of liberal reason. So he starts in the 60s where we had all these super philosophers, especially French, including people who started postmodernism, Lyotard, Foucault, Baudrillard, Derrida, all these people. And he reanalyzes all that and said, these people, they were not politically minded. They were very conservative. And they came up with this idea that every discourse or every narrative is allowed. So this means no more criteria. And postmodernism is like that, is a succession of narratives. So we are at, we could call the apex of postmodernism now, where every narrative is valuable and you can change it and discard it any way you want it. This is how the Americans think. This is how Trump thinks or acts. This is how the American system works. And they managed to contaminate Europe with that as well. It's the same thing, with maybe a different level of pop culture, which they dominate and the Europeans don't. But that's the essence of postmodernism. Anything is allowed, and there's no criteria and there's no scale of values anymore. And if you proclaim that these are our values, you don't even need to explain what they are. So when you see the European Union, European Commission say, Viktor Orban or China or whatever is against our values, they never explain What values are these? Where do they come from? What do they mean? It's just a fabrication of narratives.
I think the reason why like certain values or narratives hold so much power is because at the time when these values and ideas, social decorums and consensuses emerged, they emerge out of great social debates and social struggles. So their share of the power over the world, over people's mind, over how we conduct ourselves in society and in world order is equivalent to the stakehold they have in society,
Right.
because emerged out of that. Now with the liberalism in every way, with
Yes.
money, the flow of money, of capital, of everything, of ideas, you've taken away that layer of social constraint, which means people would hold power over society, over economy, over the future of humanity that is disproportionate to their stakehold in the society.
Absolutely, you're right. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
it's like a tree, it's like you can cast shadows over a huge plain of land, but you don't have the root.
Yeah, absolutely. And that explains a lot the mindset of most of these Silicon Valley oligarchs with their hazy agendas. Some of them extremely dangerous, right?
And China is because of its culture and its civilization. It's
Yeah.
not just because of Xi Jinping and the
No,
administration,
no,
but it's
no.
the civilizational root that the society will not allow this kind of power to exist.
Exactly.
And that is why it is impenetrable to the international capitalism so far.
True, because it's a more cohesive society. And these Confucian values, they are very, very important, essential. It's something that the West will never understand.